Hey, everybody, it's Reggie with Lawyer Interviews. And today we're talking with Courtney Richardson, who is a municipal attorney out of Philadelphia. Hi, Courtney. Oh,
Hi, how are you?
hi. Perfect. Well, and Courtney, aside from being an attorney, who practices municipal law, you are also a former stockbroker, and you also give great advice on cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency trading and
Yeah,
financial advice. So we've got to talk about a lot of stuff here. And I'd love to get to know a little bit about your practice first in municipal law. So can you briefly describe what you do and what kind of attorney you are?
sure. Thank you for having me. Municipal law is basically a general practitioner for townships and boroughs. So we serve as the sixth largest municipality in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, all the way to very small boroughs. So we get a chance to kind of dabble in a lot of things. So I think with COVID, we've kind of stretched ourselves a little bit more because we were ending up talking a lot more about COVID relief, which is, the ARPA funds, but not only just that, but then how are we dealing with, extended sick leave and all of those other things for employees, because for the most part, you don't have a whole department out because you had a COVID outbreak. That's pretty much unprecedented. So that's kind of like, how are we managing that? We've actually had, and a couple other like large cities have talked about this, more so in the early part of the pandemic, but not so much now, is sanitation. In Philadelphia, the sanitation workers were basically out. They were the first people to really kind of en masse get affected with COVID.
Right.
So again, that really kind of changed everything. And then on top of that, because people are at home more, they increase what's called tonnage, which is basically the amount of trash that they're taking in because everyone's home, as opposed to them being at their office building or wherever they were. So, basically kind of in mid transitioning, trying to renegotiate contracts based on the things that we considered in 2018 and 2017 when we're negotiating contracts. And no one ever, expected this type of situation for us to deal with. And then now we're kind of like contracting on the fly. So it's kind of like every day's a new adventure.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
But we do a lot of land development, a lot of real estate work, kind of just everything that a town would do. So very, very kind of, I want to say it's vanilla, but like I said, every day is a new adventure. Every day you're learning something new. Just as a woman of color, as a Black woman attorney, there's not many people that do this type of work
Right.
generally, and there's certainly not a lot of women that do this work, and there's not a lot of Black people that do this work. So to be a Black woman in this field, which is honestly a lot of fields of law,
Right.
is different, and it's not problematic, but it is something to kind of keep in mind, because when in the areas outside of Philadelphia, where is predominantly I work, a lot of these areas are, very racially and ethnically diverse, which is amazing. But sometimes the government does not reflect the people that it serves. I mean, surprise, surprise. I mean, that's
Right.
every.
Right.
But it's having the conversation, and sometimes it's being able to, interpret what's being said to create real workable policies, and
Right.
helping the counselors come up with real workable policies that they can implement and then pass into law and really work forward in terms of ensuring that they are implemented properly.
Wow. I mean, and I think it's such an interesting perspective to, like you said, you're a woman of color and working in an area that's probably more male dominated. And how did you get interested in municipal law, or at least your area?
It's I've kind of always been in government. And so for the most part, so I started my career early on as actually an oil and gas attorney in West Virginia, Northern West Virginia, and Southwestern Pennsylvania, where the Marcellus Shale was booming.
Hmm.
So I started that work. And for the most part, I was doing real estate title, which is oil and gas title, which is real estate title kind of that you would run with a mortgage or some type of other, but on steroids. So
Right.
typical mortgage title is done for about 30 years, but an oil and gas title is done to 1860 and run forward.
Wow.
So you learn and you see all of the things that can happen, amongst centuries of, people dying without a will, people dying with a will, people severing surface rights from the subsurface rights, all of those things. So I kind of got into real estate, but then on the side, kind of figuring out estate administration, because in order to figure out who gets what, you have to figure out what happened in there. Really had from there, I ended up working in government, wanted to get into tax. So I did tax enforcement with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is actually one of the very few states that still has what's called an inheritance tax, not the estate tax, but an inheritance tax. So the inheritance tax is basically on $1. You get taxed unless you're a spouse, which is their tax is 0%. So I did that for 2 years. Then I ran the sheriff's cell for the city of Philadelphia. So I've always been kind of somewhere touching municipal law, more specifically when I was working for the city of Philadelphia. Of course, it's municipal law, but very, very nichey. So I wanted to kind of expand my wheelhouse, kind of dip my toe into something different. So then I was able to kind of pivot relative, kind of seamlessly into doing this type of more generalized work, but for more or less the same client.
Right. Well, and how long were you working, I guess, in the municipal area before COVID hit?
At this particular, in this particular world, kind of this iteration of my career, about 6 months.
Oh,
So
you were not very long in before probably everything just flipped on its head, I'm sure.
Right. So I started in September of 19, and then March 2020, we were like, okay, we're just going to pack to go home and we'll work from home for a little bit. And then here we are 2 years later, working from home all the time.
All the time. And how much do you feel that that will change? Do you think you'll go back in person? Or do you think that some of these changes for at home are permanent for your career or job right now?
So I'm torn on that. That's actually a conversation that a lot of my friends and I were talking about, is that as much as for the first year, it was cool to work from home.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, we're working from home. This is fine.
Yeah.
And this is cool. I can just go downstairs in my slippers and, my robe, and kind of log in and do whatever work I need, and then kind of be presentable for a meeting.
Right.
But, year two, it's not so much. It's that I was talking to a friend of mine literally last night, is that we're working later.
Right.
We're working later, and I think we're working harder.
Mm-hmm.
You're not interacting with your coworkers like you used to. So you're like, hey, Susie, I have a question. Could we talk about this? I'm like, oh, Susie, your shoes are cute. Where did you get those from? It's that regular interaction that you would have at work that we're not having. So we're becoming a lot more isolated. We're working a lot longer. And I think that's starting to catch up with everyone. So do I think we're going to go back to the way we were? Probably not. But I don't think this model either is sustainable.
Right.
We're probably going to do like a hybrid at some point.
I wonder too how you feel about the work from home, representing so many boroughs. Like, do you feel like it's been a challenge, in your specific field or job, not being able to be in person?
No. So we've actually been in person. So interesting enough, we were from March, we'll say March of 2020 to probably May of 2021, we were online on Zoom, which I felt was a little bit better.
Right.
It was a little easier to manage, but Pennsylvania changed its emergency declaration policy. So it basically said the governor was no longer to just the governor declares an emergency declaration, which he did. The House and the Senate have the right to override it. So they changed our constitution of the state to allow it. That being said, immediately once it passed in May, we were told that everyone has to go back to non-emergency functioning, which means we all had to be back in person.
Oh, wow.
So I've been meeting in person. We've been meeting in person since May. Well, I say June. I think June or July of last year.
Okay.
So it's kind of gotten a little bit more hectic. I think it was easier. Like, okay, it's like, who am I working with today? Open up my laptop, pull up my Zoom. But now it's like, oh, I'm really going somewhere. So
Right.
no, I can't, walk around the house like in a suit on top and then, fuzzy slippers on the bottom.
Right.
And then also, some of my municipalities, I lived in the city of Philadelphia. So a lot of them are outside of the city and the counties. So that sometimes can be as much as 45 minutes away from my home. So when you were hopping on Zoom, it was no problem. You got off the meeting at 9. The meeting was like 2 hours, an hour and a half. You're like, okay, cool, no problem. I'm going to go turn on TV or whatever I'm going to do to decompress. But
Right.
now I have a 45-minute ride. So it just really changes the dynamic. It's interesting. And it honestly makes me miss the way we were operating, at least when it came to meetings.
Right.
The other stuff I would prefer, like with municipalities, we have to file like what we call land development plans. So they're
Mhm.
huge plans and they have to be filed and we roll them, and it's just a lot. But it's like you have to be in person to look at them, to pull them out and make
Right.
sure,
Just scroll.
and exactly. And they have to be signed physically. So there are some things that are kind of they need to be done in person, and if they're not, everything is kind of elongated. And that's the other thing I've noticed, is that everything that we used to do that used to go like this is now kind of something that could have taken maybe a day in terms of processing. It could take up to a week. I was waiting for a death certificate. The person died like the beginning of January. We just got it at the end of February.
Oh, wow.
That's
Wow,
crazy.
that's a long
Like
time.
it should
That's
take
a long time.
it should never take that long.
Right.
So, those are the things that I think like COVID is kind of just throwing us off our kilter. And again, I think people are going to want to. So, seeing with all of those things going on, I think people to a certain extent, wanting to be more interactive because they know that they're missing the interaction. Like, yes, like Bob in accounting or Sue, in HR, or, I don't know, so and so in engineering really got on your nerves.
Right.
But that was part of your day.
Right. Right.
And so now that you don't have that, I think a lot of people are missing it. So I think that's something that, so you're yearning for kind of some normalcy, what we used to have, but then on top of just having the normalcy, it's just kind of getting things back in line with what we expect things to be.
Right.
Um, and then just kind of mental health things. So kind of shutting off our day at 5 o'clock, closing our computer, and going to another phase by getting back in your car and going home.
Right.
So I think all of those things are big considerations.
Absolutely. I really like the topic of the fact that, working from home. I think employers, when COVID first started, a lot of employers, not just in law, but in general, were worried, oh, people would abuse it. And I'm sure there are those abuses, but at least what I have found is most people I've talked to end up working longer hours, longer days, longer weeks, because they just can't shut it down. And you mentioned that. Did you find any kind of balance yourself, or did you get caught in the trap too of just working too many hours, dealing with too many issues?
So I definitely think I've started, well, and especially because I think municipalities were pretty much on the ground floor of like COVID things. We were trying to figure out, how to work. So I think in those, I was very much having problems, if that makes sense. Like just kind of like working at all hours, like, oh, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm up. Why don't I just finish this thing up right quick?
Right.
Or like, and I said, hey, like, what about everything else? Because you're not just an attorney. You don't just, do law all day, all night. And again, I was telling a friend of mine, and she was like, I woke up in the middle of the night because I thought I missed a deadline. And she said, I don't think I would have done that pre-COVID.
Right. Right.
So I actually got COVID in July of 2020, I think. It was a mild case, super
Oh,
mild
good.
case. But I got it. And I say that to say, like, after I got COVID, I was like, the way I was working, I actually worked through COVID. Like I think I got it like on a Friday. Like I started feeling bad on Friday, Saturday and Sunday felt pretty bad. Monday, I was kind of like, out of it. But like Tuesday, I was like back working. And I was like, who does that? Like, even with the flu, you're like, but because I was working for, just didn't really, like, I'm in bed,
Yeah.
I'm bored. Why not? And I'm like, yeah. So after like kind of those couple of weeks, it's like, yeah, no, we're not doing this anymore. And I still do it sometimes, but I've really kind of, am at least able to check myself to go, now,
Right.
why are we doing it this way? Does this really make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, and
That's
that's
scary.
the where you set the standard of, the 6 a.m. or the 9 p.m. emails, and then you're stuck in a rut. So I get that completely. Oh, well, I'd also love to talk to you a little bit about your other side, not side hustles, but your other interesting parts of your career. You were a stock broker, is that correct? A stock trader?
Oh, yes.
Tell us a
Oh,
little bit about that part of your career and what led you into that.
So by accident. So when I got out of undergrad, so I was a philosophy major in undergrad. So I mean, it made sense. I was going to go to law school. And then my philosophy program was so intensive. And I was like, do I really want to go to school like right now? Right now?
Right.
And I was like, I need to take some time off. And so I was philosophy major. I didn't really have any marketable skills. I mean, I worked in sales, I did things like that, but not really any real marketable skills that I could, take somewhere. I did not, let me clarify. I did have some, like I did work, I did a couple of internships with like fleet credit cards, which is now after multiple iterations, Bank of America.
Yep.
I did do a couple of other internships and things, and I had jobs. So I shouldn't like undersell myself, but I really just didn't have like a accounting major or some type of business major that was a little bit more readily transferable.
Right.
So I did get so I put my resume on monster.com, and then I got a call from American Express Financial Advisors, which is now Ameriprise.
Right.
And they said, hey, do you want to be a financial advisor? And I'm like, I mean, sure. So I took the Series 7, I took the Series 66. So the Series 7 is the general brokers, general securities license exam.
Mhm.
And then the Series 66 is the legal side of it. So you learn the laws about securities and allows you, after you pass, you charge for your advice.
Right.
And then I had like life accident health, which is life insurance, annuities, things like that. So I kind of had the whole shebang, and I was 21 years old. Was like, wow, what am I going to do with this? I have no idea.
Right.
Ended up making like 100 calls a day to people who didn't really want to talk to me. And I was like, this is awful. I don't want to. But I ended up getting into banking. So I kind of got into banking. I was doing like a hybrid role between FDIC insured products, bank products. And then I was doing kind of some mutual funds, some annuities on the investment side.
Okay.
And I actually got recruited by Merrill Lynch.
Oh.
So I was recruited at Merrill Lynch. I did 401k service. So I learned more about the 401k than I've ever wanted to learn in my life. But they put you in a training program for 6 weeks to learn all about the 401k.
Right.
I learned about it. I was taking phone calls. I was a 401k specialist. And then I moved into high net worth advising. So at the age of 26, I was an assistant vice president of wealth management.
Wow, that's impressive. That's really cool. Congrats.
I was actually looking at my business card. Like I keep like business cards from like my old jobs. And I was looking at my card like, So
I'm a bad bitch.
I love the job, and it was amazing. I was working during 2006 and 2007 when like the market was rocking, and then 2008, like things started to get a little hairy.
Right. What was that like?
It was really like you kind of it's kind of like it's not even the calm before the storm. It was kind of like, it's almost even like with a storm is that you kind of start feeling those raindrops.
Right.
And you're kind of going to yourself like, is that rain or is that something else?
Tsunami.
Right. So that's actually what I was feeling. Like, I was like, it was kind of like, is this rain? So in February of 2008, there was this auction rate securities issue. And I won't kind of go into the details, but it was basically caused by an issue of over leverage. Mm-hmm. So all the banks usually, like the thing usually goes off without a hitch. Just happens, things happen, all these things. And if there's not enough buyers and sellers in the market, this part is important. Not enough buyers and sellers in the market, then a JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch, one of the big companies would jump in, clear the market, everybody goes back to being happy.
Right.
But on this particular occasion, the auction failed. Now there's always kind of like a lever in the contract that if the auction fails, the people that are in it, they get an increase in their interest rate. Mm-hmm. So if they were getting like 5% on their money, now all of a sudden the failure rate is like 13. So the person that like doesn't need the money is fine. Mm-hmm. But there were two major issues here. One is that all of the big houses didn't have any cash on hand to bail out and that was very scary.
Right.
So they didn't have enough cash on hand, and they were like, so the market, and we're like, wait, what do you mean you don't have enough cash on hand? Do you know who you are?
Right.
JP Morgan, right. Merrill Lynch.
Huge.
And then so that happened. Right. And we're like, not enough cash on hand. Something's wrong. But remember, they were all engaged in those mortgage-backed securities. So that's where they were tied up. It was just so many other things going on. So we were like, and that was kind of like my first instance of, is that rain? And I said,
something doesn't feel right here.
Right. And I said to my manager, and I really wish I could like find him again, because by the time the market crashed, he was already like out of our department, and I don't even know if he was still with the company. But I say that to say, I said, yo, isn't what 29 was caused by over leverage, right? And he said, yeah, and walked away. That
Oh,
was
I
separate.
see a pattern here.
Right. So, I mean, but again, like when I said it, like I wasn't really saying it. And it was kind of like what The Big Short was focused on. So I'm laughing because I was like, what if I would have just taken that hunch and ran with it?
Right.
So I always laugh at that, but that's my part. So February comes, and then the summer was kind of started to get a little hairy. Nothing really crazy. We were still kind of living our lives, but then in September, things like the wall started falling down. Lehman fell, and we were like, "What do you mean?" And then Bank of America purchased Merrill Lynch, and we're like, "Oh, okay." Like I heard about it literally on the news as I was coming into the office, and I get in. I'm like looking at my email. Like this is like we just got Blackberries at the time, so I'm looking at my email.
Right.
No announcement. I'm looking at my regular email. I'm like on my computer. Maybe I missed it. No announcement, and I'm like, is someone going to say something to us? So we like lived in like this state of like fear, and there were layoffs after layoffs after layoffs. So like I think after like the 6th or 7th round, I was laid off in March of 2020. What is it? 2009.
Oh, 09. Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
But it was kind of like, oh, well, finally, so it wasn't terrible. I did a trip to the Philippines. I lived there for a month. I
Oh,
ended up going to law school like right after that, because I was planning to go to law school. I was just going to go part-time. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll go full-time. So it wasn't really like people were like, oh my gosh, that's so sad. I'm like, I was fine. I got a great severance. I had a lot of money. Like I was
good.
perfect. I went to law school, and then I was able to like really take that information. And part of it, like law school is really stressful. And a lot of people kind of internalize, like, what if I get it wrong in class? Has nothing to do with your grade. You're just going to get picked on. Invariably, you're going to get it wrong.
Right.
Or, maybe you just didn't read the case because you just had entirely too much reading that night.
Right.
And sometimes I mean, and like to me, people are like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, oh, well, if I get it wrong, I get it wrong, because I just lived through the market crash.
Right.
Like, it's kind of like,
you lived through one of like the worst periods of America in the one financial field that just got rocked. You got high stress. You've dealt with the highest.
and I'm like, okay, so I forgot the holding in like, I don't know, international papers. I'm like,
Yeah, Twombly or
Twombly,
or Volkswagen.
like, I don't know. I mean, okay, I forgot it.
Yeah.
But again, I think those things kind of grounded me in law school. So I was able to kind of bring it all for full circle when my friends, like I got back, when I was started being an associate in 2012 and 2014, all of my friends were calling me because, now I kind of stepped out of my previous career a little bit earlier than everybody else, but now people are starting to transition, and they're like, hey, I'm leaving my job. What should I do with my 401k? Hey, I'm having a kid. What should I do? Hey, I'm buying a house. What's going on with my credit? And it's like, hey, all these questions. I'm like, one of the things that I've realized in those conversations is that people didn't have a base level of knowledge.
No.
At all. So I would say, well, yeah. So, okay. So your 401k. Okay. Well, tell me more about it. Yeah, you could probably do a rollover. And they're like, well, what's a rollover?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and I would say like, oh, you should do probably a rollover to this place. And they're like, what's a rollover?
Right.
I'm like, wait. So before I even get into where you should roll it, you got to know what this is and why it's important, and kind of what the tax implications of just kind of taking $20,000 out of a non-taxable account is going to do to your taxes, and and what's going to do to your retirement. Because invariably, if you remove $20,000, you're not gonna be like, what? Let me put that money back in my retirement. You're not.
Right.
Typically, that's not what's going to happen. Now, some people do, but most people don't. So again, it's kind of having the conversation. Also talking about 529s. People are like, I'm about to have a kid, and I'm like, well, put up for 529.
Like a
like,
what?
yeah, my parents. Like, what is that? 529. And then they'll say, well, my parents have a lot of money, but they don't know what to do with it. But I really want to give something to my kid. I'm like, oh, just do accelerated gifting. And they're like, what?
Yeah. I think that's what's so interesting about your account too. And I love this. I mean, you're giving financial, advice and planning and information, even some of these basics that even sometimes people with JDs, a doctorate, don't know. It's so amazing how financially illiterate people in the US are. I mean, I'm sure that you being very experienced in stocks and financial planning and even cryptocurrency, it probably shocks you the level of education that people can obtain, but yet be so completely illiterate when it comes to finances, banking, savings, retirement. Has it shocked you at all?
So because I tell people I've worked from Main Street to Wall Street, it doesn't, because it's just kind of like I'm just seeing my Main Street people just kind of being Main Street people, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, but again, I think the fact that I tell people, like, people are so thirsty for information is that they end up sometimes drinking dirty water or getting
Right.
scammed or something, because it's like, hey, I really want to learn this information, but because they don't have like a base, most people don't have a base level of knowledge. You don't know if if the person's saying this right or if not. So like if I went to a car lot, I went to a used car lot, I'm like, hey, I'm looking for the car. They're like, oh yeah, we got you. It has heated seats, it has a moonroof, it has, all of these things, all wheel drive, and kind of goes through all these things. And then you're like, okay, that's great. And they're like, but the only thing that's wrong is it only has 3 wheels.
Yeah, that's a little harder to drive.
Great that it has all these things, but it doesn't have the basics of the things that you need to actually drive a car.
Right, exactly.
So those are the things that I've seen kind of like in real time. And even just like listening to like older people getting, like my aunt the other day was like, she received a message on Facebook and they said, hey, if you give us, I think it was $2,500 or $1,500. I think it was $1,500 in gift cards. We'll send you $100,000 in your bank account.
Oh no.
And I was like, so she told my dad about it, and I was like, no. But again, like, this isn't like I was surprised, but I wasn't surprised, if that makes sense, because I see that level of just kind of like, hey, I'm trying to get rich quick so I can do this. And
Right.
it's like, that just doesn't even follow. But I also see that kind of idea, or that, with cryptocurrency or NFTs or even the stock market, a lot of people made a lot of money and a lot of mistakes in 2020. Like all people were doing, just sitting at the market, I'm bored, I'm going to go into Robinhood, which is
Right.
fine. But it was like, one of the things that I say people need when we're looking at finances is access and education.
Mm.
So like, for example, I like Robinhood. Robinhood provided a lot of access,
Mhm.
but not so much on the education side. And not necessarily that they didn't have everything, but just even that it wasn't like, hey, before you go involve yourself with margin trading, I want you to take a full class on it so you to know exactly how this thing could really blow up your account and
Yeah.
make a mess.
Know what you're leveraging, know what you're about to risk here, because we saw that whole debacle with Robinhood unfold after you had these little traders who had no idea what they were doing and just losing everything. And like almost no responsibility on the part of the company, because they're like, no, they had access, they could have educated themselves. I kind of wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's disingenuous, because here's the thing. So for example, with margin, so again, like I worked with high net worth clients, there was no account that we would code for margin trading if they didn't have 25,000
Mm.
investable assets. It was either cash or investable assets. I can't remember the exact code, but so that was kind of like a barrier to entry.
Right.
With Robinhood, you could have as little as $2,000 in cash and be able to work off a margin.
Right.
And you're like, do you know how dangerous that is?
Right. Right.
It's super dangerous. And now, granted, but on the other side, on the good side, is that Robinhood is very easy to use.
Mhm.
So I know, like, I started trading like online, like back in the day when everything was super slow and you had to keep keying things. And now you can kind of like 2-3 buttons and you're done.
Right.
So
Right.
Robinhood has gotten that right. But in terms of not taking responsibility when you're providing access where there was a barrier, and you're like, it's for everybody. Well, yeah, you are. But at the same time, like I said, you're providing access to a population that didn't have it before, but you're not providing equal education to go along with the access to make sure that, and people are going to be reckless all the time. Like people are, I mean, and we know that as attorneys, because
Right.
all we do in law school is, where things went terribly wrong and off the tracks. That's all
Right.
we do. And then they wonder why like attorneys are like paranoid, because
Yeah, we're always like,
learning about
when's the other shoe going to drop? We always are expecting it.
Right. Like, I was at a meeting yesterday and like the front door was like closed or locked. And I was like, please open that door. It's a fire hazard.
Right.
And,
Right.
so exactly. So you're just like always like, okay, and so again, I think that's where you can't take, you have to take responsibility, and responsibility isn't always fun.
Right.
And I think some of the companies that I think are the most, that have kind of done the best over the years, are companies that have said, you know what, we got that wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we have actually even talked about this in law school, is that even if someone says, I'm sorry, it's not necessarily like an admission of guilt or anything. They're just saying, I'm sorry. But honestly, in lots of cases, when it comes to PI and things like that, that actually kind of brings down the situation a lot. But a lot of people, because they don't want to say, I'm sorry, or something like that, it kind of ratchets it up the kind of the stakes in the circumstances.
Right.
So I kind of take that to corporate, responsibility. And the same thing is like, hey, we didn't get this right. And these are the things we're going to do to fix it. But Robinhood was kind of like, nah,
Yeah. That was so surprising to me too. I thought, here's a good opportunity to maybe invest some money into, consumer education and trying to make it a little bit right where they had fallen short. And I was a little surprised that more wasn't done by them after that whole debacle. But maybe I shouldn't be surprised. I don't know. Well, Courtney, it's been so great talking to you, and it's been a very interesting conversation. You've had such an interesting career, going from stock trading and financial planning to law school and now to government work. And also, I want people to check out your account because you offer some amazing advice to young people, whether they're lawyers, just average Joes, it doesn't matter, and regarding financial planning, cryptocurrency, and the law. So I'd love you to tell everyone your handles for social media so that they can follow you.
Thank you. So yeah, you can follow me at the Ivy Investor. So THEIVY Investor on all platforms. So on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook. And, I really try to incorporate all the things that I enjoy into my commentary. And I think once you can kind of relate all those things together, you're like, oh, this makes it a little bit easier. So I try to make finance a little bit easier to understand and digest.
Right. And it's not, I mean, we don't, a lot of education, especially in America, you're not taught the fundamentals even in high school. So people don't know this. And so it's so great to have, like you said, sometimes you get bad information. So someone who's done it, been there, who's lived through it, especially the most stressful times in America, right? And has done it, at least you're getting experienced, knowledgeable opinion. So go follow Courtney, everybody. And thank you, Courtney, again for joining us at Lawyer Interviews. And you have a great day. And thanks for watching, everybody.